Hello, everybody, such as you are. Been a while since I've done a video, and I've been thinking about doing one for well, about a week now, I guess. And just been really busy. Nothing bad going on. Nothing, no traumas, no personal dramas. Uh, there's a lot of drama going on in the world. So as I watch things go down, and my wife and I talk about what's happening in the world, that eventually I get to a point where I want to share some of my observations and prognostications and whatnot. So, what have I been doing? I'm dressed up kind of warm this morning. It's cold here in the South Bay Area. Um, why not? It's winter, right? So it can be. I took out, I did a lot of roof work on the roof. Wasn't happy with it. And while I was up there, cleaned out all the old insulation, and I haven't put it back in yet. It hasn't been a real high priority for me. Got other irons in the fire. So right now the ceiling doesn't have insulation in it. um, it's fine. Dress warm. You're good. We get a lot of sun around here, and so it's only really cold in the morning, and come you know noon or even earlier, it's really warm. Plus we're outside a lot, and sunny days. All this stuff will come off. I'll go outside here after this video, and all this will come off because it's just really nice out there. So as I was working on the roof, I took part of the roof and I made it flat roof. I'm experimenting with flat roofs. Flat roofs are problematic. They tend to leak and they tend to collect water. I'm actually leveraging the water collection part. Right here in California right now, we're having a record extensive drought. Actually, the entire uh, Southwest and the near West is having drought problems. Um, we're also having an La Nina year. Part of the uh, El Nino Southern Oscillation cycle is La Nina, and then there's El Nino, and it goes back and forth. It's an oscillation. And that drives more moisture into the Pacific Northwest, so Oregon and Washington. We haven't been getting a whole lot of that, but we've been getting some. So our drought may alleviate a little bit, but my expectation is still that going forward in California, we're going to have water concerns. Maybe there'll be wet years, but my guess is they're going to be interspersed with much longer periods of time of dry. So I flattened part of the roof with a slight slope on it. Not enough that you would notice when you're standing up there, but it is enough to drive the water to one edge. I rimmed it with wood, sealed everything, put a paint sealer on it, a latex elastomeric paint that they use for metal roofing, and then put some ABS, not ABS, PVC, some PVC plumbing to capture the water in like a little hole at the eave. So I have water capture now, and I have a couple of flat roofs to do water capture. I don't have a cistern to put it in. We're just collecting it in garbage cans, and then I gave my wife a portable electric pump that you can just drop in a garbage can with a hose on it and pump the water out. So we pump the water out, we pump it into the garden, and once it's in the garden, right? It'll be there even next summer to kind of percolate up through the soil and water the plants, or at least keep them from having too much shock if it gets kind of dry. So ideally, though, we want to capture that water into a cistern, which I will describe at a later date, I guess. Basically, it's an in-ground cistern that I'm going to build myself. So there's that project, and that's been taking up a lot of my time. It did leak a little bit, surprisingly, very little, and there was just some places where I kind of cut some corners. So I've been going up there and making corrections and fixing some things and learning in the process. And that's what this is about, right? I take on huge projects. I take on really dangerous projects that people would just like be aghast. Like, why are you doing that? That's completely insane. It'll be nothing but trouble. But I do it as I'm experimenting with materials, techniques, methodologies, and the flat roof was about collecting water. You'd be amazed how much water you get off of a roof. We would get like a 1/4 inch of rain in one of these recent storms, and it would fill up a garbage can. And of course, it's full. So we actually don't know how much you collected because some of it ran over. And we've been getting even better than a 1/4 inch of rain in a lot of these storms. Sometime back, the last storm that came through, we ended up with, I want to say 3 inches over the course of 4 days, I guess, which for California is pretty good. That much rain collected in a suitable way would, put a lot of water into a cistern. So that's going to be another project, is digging these cisterns in and plumbing them correctly and filling them up. The water would then be used in the summer to water the garden. They're already talking about here, California, in particular the Bay Area, they're talking about, we're not meeting our conservation goals. They were 15% reductions, voluntary 15% reductions, and they didn't get even, I don't think, half of that from people. So now they're going to do mandatory reductions. And my actual expectation at some point is that they're going to require 25% to 50% mandatory reductions, because the water situation in California is exceedingly grim, very, very grim. There's really the risk of just flat running out of water. And when you run out of water, you're going to suffer impacts in several key areas. One of them we're already seeing in some of our reservoirs up north, like Orville. The water level in the reservoir is so low that it's below the level of the output tube that goes into the powerhouse. So as the water level drops, you have less water, but you also fall below the level that you can generate electricity. So one of the knock-on effects is that as you get into drought, your amount of available electricity also starts to decrease, and no one really expects that. You're in a drought, maybe my water becomes more expensive, less available for watering my lawn or whatever, but you don't expect to have power problems. So that's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is water becomes more expensive or less available for certain activities. It may become less available for agriculture. There may be some types of crops that are considered luxury goods or export goods that don't really serve the immediate needs of people, like grapes, for example. And then they may simply say, yeah, you guys don't get any water. Unless you have your own water, you're collecting water, whatever, we're just not going to ship you any water. That'll impact, lots of industries if that actually happens, and if it, is prolonged. Restrictions like that, then that could really be disruptive to the economy, the local economy. Not that I care about that, but I'm just saying that that's a thing. And then the other thing is just availability for drinking water. I don't know how they're going to prioritize the water allotments between, big ag, the electricity generation, and drinking water for cities. And you might think, well, the obvious answer is they're going to make sure that people have drinking water. That is not the obvious answer. I don't know how to tell you this, but our state government is dominated by agricultural influences, big ag. And Southern California has some of the biggest agricultural corporations on the planet. And if they want the water, there's a chance they're going to get the water. And if that means people don't get water, well, they can buy bottled water. They can have bottled water imported from Texas. And if it costs them $20 a gallon for bottled water imported from Texas or Louisiana, well, then they'll have to pay. And that's just the attitude. Eventually. Now, municipal governments, county governments are going to say, wow, that's going to lead to a lot of unrest. Corporations don't care. And a lot of the crops they grow are sold elsewhere on the planet. They don't care. They just don't care. So we'll see how that plays out. That's a pretty grim forecast for the water situation in California. We'll see how that plays out. It's probably too late in the year for me to be collecting any of this rainwater into a cistern. We're just going to pump it back into the lot, back into the garden, and just let it kind of store there somewhat for next summer. But we're going to have to figure out our water situation here. And so that's another project. But the flat roof and the plumbing from that was part of that project. My more strategic work, as it were. We're also doing some, I don't want to call it housing construction because we're modifying existing buildings so we can provide some housing for people, friends and family, really. Tiny homes, things like that. I may eventually build an ADU. Not real sure about that. ADU is a industry term for additional dwelling unit. It's a home you build on your property when you already have a home. And there are size restrictions and height restrictions and some other things. They used to call them granny homes or granny flats. So if you had an elder, an uncle or an aunt or a grandma or grandpa, and you wanted to house them on your property, maybe you don't want them in your house. Maybe your house is full of people. So you build this additional dwelling unit next to your house, somewhere on your lot. And then your elder can live there with you. And these are granny units. And you keep an eye on them, of course, take care of them, go shopping for them, whatnot. So we might build an ADU, a granny unit, to have some income from it, whatever. But that's another project for down the road. Maybe even this summer. When I say down the road, I'm not meaning 10 years down the road. All this has to happen in a fairly short period of time. Because unless you've been hiding under a rock somewhere, you know that there are problems with resources, supplies, supply chain problems. I don't have a good feeling for why that is. People who follow these things are blaming it on the pandemic. Okay, fine. The chip shortage, I can see that. But some of the stuff like with lumber and whatnot, I'm not so sure. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on. But anyway, it's a little bit alarming that it may become difficult to find resources, supplies, and whatnot to do the construction plans I have in mind. So these projects probably get accelerated a little bit because of that. So yeah, I'm keeping busy. I had to relocate some solar panels. Again, I have these nice flat roofs. You don't need a flat roof for solar panels. An angled roof is probably better. If you put solar panels on a flat roof, they're pointing straight up, and that's not optimal at all. But the way I handle that is I make a hinged frame. So the frame has a base and it has an upright, and the upright is hinged at the base like this. Just fence hinges, door hinges, gate hinges. So I put the solar panels on the hinged part, and I can angle them whatever I want, and they're on a flat roof, and so I can get away with that. That's good because the place they were before was not optimal at all. There was trees and buildings, and panels were too close together, and they were shading each other, and you can't have that. That's just not allowed. So I moved them. A lot of carpentry, a lot of getting things up on the roof. The return lines that go back to the solar battery storage had to be buried in the ground, and a bunch of other things. So that's all working fine. Happy with them where they are. The angle of the incident angle is set. I have a support, an upright that holds it at a particular angle. I can adjust it if I want to. It's movable. It's hinged itself. It can be moved, so I can change the angle. Ideally, I think I would probably put a what's it called, a linear actuator. Linear actuator is a rod. It's a threaded rod that has a little electric motor on it, and you can lengthen it and shorten it. And I would probably put one of those in there somehow. I'd have to think about it to that I could change the angle either automatically according to a program, or just have it sense where the sun is in the sky and just angle the thing to an optimal angle. That would be pretty cool. You can also buy solar installation platforms that change the angle and the rotation, but I think that's too many degrees of freedom. It's just really not necessary. You don't get a whole lot more by changing the rotation and following the sun like a sunflower, but you do get quite a bit better by changing the incident angle. That makes a big difference. So I experiment a little bit up there with changing the angle, and I got something that was optimal, I thought. But having a linear actuator that it could either change dynamically every day, or that I could change based on the seasons. Like once a week you change it, or once a month you change it, and increase the angle, decrease the angle, something like that. So that might be another way to optimize the panels on the flat roof. And the other use of the flat roof, in addition to collecting rainwater, positioning the solar panels, and then is rooftop gardening. We have a garden in the back, the raised beds, some irrigation has been installed. It works really well. But my concern is that you're going to really want all of your property available for gardening at some point. You know, whether it's dwarf trees for fruits, you know, row gardens, corn, whatever. You know, you're going to need all you want. You're going to want all your property to be available for gardening. Now, gardening does take water. Well, I'll have the cisterns installed to water the garden. Of course, you use drip irrigation. You're very frugal with your water. Probably will have to put over the beds shade cloth, like up on poles or something like that. The shade cloth over it. Maybe, you know, maybe take it down in the winter, or, you know, roll it up and then roll it back out again in the summer, something like that. In the long term, it was very hot last summer. It was very hard to grow anything. I had to water twice a day, or the plants were wilting. Some of the plants got so hot they couldn't really produce anything of value. The okra, which I really wanted to have some okra, it just never grew. It just was so hot, it just couldn't grow at all. So I think that's a premonition of things to come. Certainly for growing areas, it just gets too hot. Plants can't handle it. They just can't handle it. And you can water and throw water around, but that's in a very expensive way to, in terms of a resource, a limited resource, water. That's a very expensive way to cool your plants and cool your garden in so they can grow. So I'm going to need more. I'm going to need more infrastructure to promote the gardening, either shade cloth, or I'm actually thinking about maybe enclosing the parts of the garden where we're growing plants. Enclosing it means like the opposite of a greenhouse. It could have some benefits of a greenhouse in that since it's enclosed, you could grow things in the winter. It could be warmer in there than maybe it would be otherwise. So you could grow some things in there in the winter and extend your growing season. But you know, being able to grow in the winter, it would just be like a fraction of the reason to enclose things. The other reason is because you could moderate the temperature inside so that you could get an optimal temperature for growth in the summer. And now, what are you talking about now? You're talking about having walls with, you know, windows in them, insulation in the ceiling, and the ceiling over the beds and the whole thing. You know, you could have skylights that let the light in, but there's not going to be enough light. So that means you're going to have to put in grow lights, and that means you have enormous electricity consumption, but we're already solar. So that's not really a big deal for me. It means you have to buy the grow lights and position them over the beds and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, we're at a point right now in humanity's history where we're going to have to become extremely clever about throwing technology at problems, okay? The push right now to electrify the rolling fleet, so trucks, trains, buses, and of course private vehicles, we're throwing technology at that. You know, they've talked about synthetic fuels for jets. They're talking about electric vehicles, all the problems with lithium. How do you get it? Who has it? The politics of that. Are there alternatives to lithium batteries that work really well? And then, of course, where's the electricity come from? Oh, well, it comes from the grid. Yeah, it doesn't really work like that, folks. Because of the drought, we're shutting down power plants that were generating hydropower. We don't have much nuclear. We don't have enough to fall back on. And then if that doesn't work out, then we're back on fossil fuels, coal and natural gas. We don't want that. That's actually the wrong direction. That's not the fix. So as we throw technology at just transportation, just that one thing all by itself, just transportation, we open up a whole spectrum of potential problems with that technological solution. But, you know, I'm solar. And so if my problem is that my plants are too hot in the summer to grow, forcing me to use water that is really not available for that purpose of cooling, then I can just build a structure. And, you know, lumber is reasonably available. It's cost effective. I can build structures out of lumber. I can insulate the walls, or at least insulate the ceiling. Maybe you don't have to insulate the walls. I can put in skylights, and then I can put in grow lights, just for my garden, right? Um, Probably don't need to air condition the space as such, just being able to control the amount of sun that it gets and keeping the hot air on the outside. The air is heated by other people's rooftops, not mine because they're white, other people's rooftops, the asphalt, all the concrete that's been spread around. Uh, and of course, we don't have nearly enough trees to shade these things so they get hot. So there's hot air, and it just the wind just blows it into your lot, and it just cooks everything. It cooks all your plants. In Oregon, when they had that big heat dome that knocked everybody out of their socks, that heat dome was cooking the fruits and vegetables in situ, in place, cooking them. So you want to avoid that. That means you have to enclose your growing area to keep that hot air out. And then if you have to insulate the ceiling, I mean, your roof should be painted white at that point. But if you have to insulate the ceiling as well, you go ahead and you do that. Now I got solar. So when I enclose my crops such that I have to put in grow lights, then I go to the roof and I lay down a bunch of solar panels. And then that's the electricity imported through the roof to run my grow lights. So it's dumb, right? It's like, well, why don't you take the roof off? The sun is free. The sun is not free. The sun is not free in this scenario because of the burden of the heat. The sun is not free. But if I can translate the sun through the solar panels, even with the losses, even with the 80% loss, because the solar panels are not 100% efficient, even with the 80% loss, the control I gain is immensely valuable. And one of the things that's happening to us with global heating is that the systems that used to support us in a predictable way are out of control. Out of control. We can't rely on things being the same way they were even a decade ago, least of all 100 years ago. It's out of control. And my wife and I have been watching weather accounts, like atmospheric weather, like on YouTube, where these guys will talk about the weather. And the reason we're doing that is because it's just been so extreme. Record heat in the south and the southeast, record cold coming in from the north. Oh, it's always cold in the winter. Well, not like this, it's not. And then, of course, there's the confluence of the two, where you have record heat in the southeast, and then you have a cold air mass coming down from the Arctic, and the two collide. And at that boundary, you get severe storms. Western Kentucky and 4 or 5 other states had a outbreak of tornadoes at one of these severe storm interfaces between the record moist air and extremely cold air descending from the Arctic, and just destroyed communities all across Western Kentucky and some of the other states in the path. They had what may have been the biggest tornado, the most powerful tornado ever seen by humans, possibly, depending on how you count these things. Went through Mayfield, Kentucky, wiped it out. And that's not the problem. That's not why it's record breaking. It's record breaking because it started in, I don't know, Texas or Arkansas or someplace, and went over 200 miles on the ground as an EF4, EF5 tornado, and just tearing things up like a gigantic lawnmower for over 200 miles, 210 or 250, depending on who's doing the estimating. This is completely unhinged. And that followed on, I don't know, 6 months earlier, that same general area had record floods. It rained so much, 10, 12 inches of rain in a 48-hour period. Rained so much, everything flooded, chest deep in all these towns. Some of that might be just bad zoning. They're building down near the river, whatever. But the fact remains that either floods like that were so rare or had never occurred before that county assessors and development planners felt okay giving you a permit to build on that particular part of that particular landscape. So anyway, chest high deep water, water even deeper than that, and then 6-8 months later, they had record tornadoes coming through. So as I'm listening to the weather stations discussing situations, every other day it's the same story: record high temperatures in the south, record high temperatures in the southeast, massive amounts of moisture in the air in the southeast, and oh look, up here there's a record cold front coming down, massive cold fronts, 20 degrees below zero in Montana. Well, we've had that before. Yeah, I know, but these things are happening all the time now. Like 4 or 5 times this winter, in the span of 6 weeks, we've had this confluence of, wow, record high temperatures, 90 degrees, in the south, middle of December, and then massive cold fronts coming down from the Arctic. Now I keep saying from the Arctic. That's what's happening. This is not local weather. This is not local weather caused by the sun is low in the sky because it's winter. We're not getting much solar radiation because it's winter. There are winds blowing in an unusual way because it's winter, and so it's cold. This is not weather. This is massive amounts, massive air masses that are essentially sliding off of the North Pole, like a plate can slide off of a table if it's slick, and they're just sliding off of the North Pole and descending into the lower 48. And it's Arctic air. And if you went to the Arctic, if you jumped on a plane and went to the Arctic and tried to go across country up there, you would die. You just can't do it. And nobody does it. It's just too cold. You can't even breathe the air. It's so cold. It'll just kill you. Well, that air, if it stays up there, that's fine. But when it doesn't stay up there, when it comes down to the lower 48 through Canada, and as it does that in Europe as well, by the way. But I'm just talking about what I know. When it slides off the North Pole and it comes down to visit us, it's ruinous. And that's what caused those massive tornado outbreaks in Kentucky. And then a week later, it caused a massive derecho, that's the word for it, to go across, I guess it was Iowa and into Wisconsin, I can't remember now, Minnesota, massive derecho, 100-mile-an-hour gusts. It's like a land hurricane. 100-mile-an-hour gust. The thing was like 450 miles long. Enormous, just absolutely enormous. Wreaked havoc. And, communities went from 30 degrees above normal to, an air shift 40 degrees colder, if not record-breaking cold, right? In 2 or 3 hours. And these kinds of things are just unseen. This is mostly new. Well, we've had that once before. We've had derechos before. We've had cold. Yep. People are noticing that this is wrong. Yeah, your granddaddy once had this happen. And we've had it like several times now in the last few months that massive temperature records were broke by a cold front that came in. And 48 hours later, it was a completely different regime, completely different. They're calling it weather whiplash. The weather people just look at it and laugh. It's like, well, here it is. I don't even know what to say. Here it is. Get ready for it. You're going to be 20 degrees above normal today, and tomorrow at the same time, you're going to be 20 degrees below normal. Deal with it. So we've been seeing that. Not so much here because our climate is pretty moderate. My wife and I like to say we're in the sweet spot as these things go. The La Nina-based atmospheric rivers have been tending towards the north of us, and the drought that's plaguing this region is tending towards the south of us. And the derechos and the tornadoes, of course, are tending towards the east of us, as they normally would anyway. We've had some remarkable cold here. We don't generally have freezing days I don't pay much attention to the temperature. Most people don't, but freezing days are unusual, and we've had some, and that's because we're catching sort of the edge of these gigantic cold air masses that are coming down from the Arctic. They're just grazing our part of the state, and we just get some of the spillover, if you would, from these things. And still, it's freezing. Okay, it's really cold. Don't know what the unhoused population around here is doing. It looks pretty grim for them these cold days, and in a few days, maybe even starting tomorrow, we're going to have like 6 days of rain. And some of it's going to be pretty heavy. So, we've been missing most of the La Nina atmospheric phenomena, but we're going to catch some of it starting tonight. That'll be interesting to see. Wish I had my cistern working, but I don't, so I'm not going to worry about it. That'll be next year. So what else do we have? I guess that's about it for me. In general, what we're doing around here is we're digging in, figuring out our energy situation, putting up solar panels, adding to the system, rewiring parts of the house to better use the solar and to provide a backup from the grid. We're also, of course, digging in to create water cistern and rainwater capture and water cistern storage for the garden for next year. Probably won't be working, but that's the plan. We're building probably this summer, we'll be building additional housing unit or modifying some existing outbuildings to make them suitable for human occupation. And at a little later this year, probably I will tear the inside of this house apart, do some rewiring in the kitchen, probably remodel the kitchen, put the insulation in the ceiling, actually tear the ceiling down and put the insulation in the what is essentially the roof. There won't be a ceiling, it'll just be a big space up there. We're going to use hemp insulation. So that's one of the reasons why I haven't done it, is I need to get it all exposed so I can kind of count the number of joists that I have to put insulation in and measure them for the width. I could probably do it because I just made the work. I could probably do it, but the stuff is expensive and you don't want to get too much of it. So I really need to study it and make sure I understand what has to be done. And then they manufacture it for you to your specs, and then they ship it to you. So doing hemp because we're trying to avoid, non-renewable resources. And also it's kind of an experiment. See if I like it. See if I like working with it. If it works well for the purpose and those kinds of things. So that'll happen a little later, most likely. So that's where I've been at. Really busy and making problems for myself, roof leaks and things like that. But it's all part of the process. It's all part of moving us all into a different regime. I think we're in for a wild ride, folks. I really do. This winter has been an eye opener for me and for a lot of other people. We're sitting back and we're looking at the Earth dynamic system, and we're just wondering, where is all this headed? And you should be asking those questions for your region. What's happening here? And more importantly, where is this headed? What does this tell me I have to be prepared to deal with, or what's going to happen? No one really knows the future. The Earth dynamic system. Here's some word salad for you. The Earth dynamic system is on an excursion. It's going into a new equilibrium. We won't reach that equilibrium for 50 to 100 years. On the way there, whatever that is, and your region will only know 100 years from now, whatever that new equilibrium is, we will go through various extremes as we're trying to find the path to the future, okay? It's a bit like groping around in the dark. You try over here, you try over there, and then you say, I think this is it. And then you go there. Okay, that's what the Earth system does. It doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have a strategy. It doesn't have a destination. It just has questions. Okay, how much energy do I have? Where am I going to put it? It's got to go away. I want to radiate it to space. No, I'm going to use it to melt ice. No, I'm going to use it to move this air mass. No, I'm going to use it to drop this moisture. No, I'm going to use it to make snow. And as it's groping around, trying to decide, okay, in air quotes, as it's trying to decide what it's going to do with this extra energy from global heating, it basically it experiments. It experiments with all these different things. And the system will eventually settle down. Okay, it'll settle down, but it won't settle down the way it was. It'll settle down in its new destination, its new location. And we do know something about that. It is not entirely unknown what that's going to look like. We've been here before. Life on this earth has been here before. And that was about 20 million years ago. The CO2 levels on this planet were quite a bit more elevated than what they are now. I don't know the number. I don't need to know the number. We're just talking about qualitative differences, okay? So CO2 was more elevated. The planet was warmer. Indications of how warm it was. There was no ice probably anywhere on the planet. And there were reptiles living at the poles. Not so much the North Pole because that's mostly water. But at the South Pole, Antarctica, they have the remains of forests. They have petrified forests, and they have basically reptilian and amphibian fossils on Antarctica. We joke around here of, crocodiles at the poles. Crocodiles at the poles. That was pretty much sums it up. So we've been here before, as not as a species. Humans are only about 200,000 years existence on the planet, and not even as primates. Primates are relatively recent, but as living organisms, we have seen this planet before, in a place that is probably where it's going to go after this event, this excursion. Okay. Humans are going to continue to dig up fossil fuels. We're going to continue to pump this into the atmosphere as a waste product. That's where we do everything else with waste products, right? Waste products, where do they go? They go in the rivers, they go in the sky, they go into the food supply. That's what you do with waste products. That's what you do. So that will continue to happen. We'll continue to alter the atmosphere. The Earth, which is now on an excursion, will continue to be driven by that trend of altering the atmosphere. It will continue. It will accelerate. It will speed up the same way that if you push on something for a long time, consistently, it will get faster. It'll accelerate. Okay, you don't have to push hard. You just have to push for a long time, and pretty soon you've got a good head of motion. So this Earth dynamic system is on an excursion that's going to continue. We kind of know where it's headed. Every region is going to be a little bit different, but we kind of know where this thing is headed. It's headed towards no ice. Sea level rise about 280 feet or so, 270 feet. I've seen different numbers. Uniform temperatures from the equators to the poles, and no ice anywhere on the planet, and crocodiles at the poles, essentially. That's where this is headed, because that's where it was before the CO2 was lowered enough to give us ice ages and a limited life at the poles, which is the scenario under the Ice Age set of rules. Well, those set of rules are now being reversed. And, I got to say something here. As detrimental as that's going to be to human civilization, probably it will end human civilization, large-scale human civilization, completely. As detrimental as that is to us, the planet is probably more resilient and healthier and more diverse without so much cold. The cold supports very specific adaptations, like animals with lots of fur and animals that hibernate and all those kinds of things. And we love our diversity. We love our polar bears, for example, and our yaks and our caribou and, the reindeer and the things that are now familiar to us from the period of ice when the earth was partially frozen. So that's going to go away. But on the other hand, an earth that's covered with tropical and temperate rainforests, lots of rain. Every place on the earth gets an inch of rain a day. That kind of stuff. That's also interesting and useful. And the seasonal swings will be gone. You won't have fall colors, and you won't even have necessarily deciduous trees. You'll have more tropical or temperate trees that never bother dropping their leaves, because why? There's no winter. So everything will be green all the time. And then, we'll settle down into a new equilibrium based upon elevated CO2 levels. And it's possible that will be the case essentially for all time. This planet may always be like that.
I'm going to say hi.
What?
You're doing such a great job.
Fine. The whole business of lowering CO2 levels so that we can have ice ages and winters and seasons and things like that, that was kind of a one-off. That was a one-time deal. You don't have a chair.
I know, just give me a kiss.
I'm losing my train of thought.
Okay, go ahead. I'll just listen.
Okay. That was probably a one-off. Some of the conditions that gave rise to all that burying of carbon that now we see as coal and natural gas and crude oil deposits, that was probably a one-off. We may not have that happening again. Maybe in a small way, maybe natural gas deposits, and maybe they're worth collecting, but the planet is being taken back. And is that really a bad thing? I don't know. It's going to be bad for us. We humans, we did not evolve in a tropical rainforest. Humans are, the hominid line, going back to very, very primitive, barely recognizable human-like things, is 5 million years in the making. Maybe not even that. Humans, if you include Neanderthals, which probably you should, are about 400,000 years, 1/8 of that. Okay, 1/8 of that time was modern or semi-modern humans. And we did not evolve in the older Earth. We evolved in this new climatic regime, heavily dominated by low CO2 levels and ice. In fact, it's unlikely that a bipedal creature would have ventured out of the rainforest without savannas, right, full of wandering herds of beasts. And you don't have wandering herds, easy meat, without a decrease in rainfall and an increase in drought and temperate conditions. So we left the rainforests. We got on our two legs and walked out into the savannas with all that ready meat to eat. And we then evolved. Our big brains, everything is from having a high access to a great food supply in the meat. All that was possible. Everything we did was made possible by the ice ages. If you look at primates that live in rainforests, you have to look at chimps, gorillas, orangutans. They're slow moving. They live in small troops. They sit a lot. They eat. They digest a lot. They don't have a lot of visibility. Their actual the sight distance is very small. It's no more than 10 feet at a time. Their brain development is different as a consequence. They're more focused on each other than on what's beyond their troop. And you contrast that with how modern humans behave, and our tendency to look further. And I don't mean just literally, but also metaphorically. How much of our brain capacity was actually developed to support foresight? Foresight meaning planning ahead, okay, but also you can see further. How much of our brain capacity was made necessary and enabled and made evolutionarily valuable by being able to see 50 miles? So we evolved in a very specific time frame where conditions were very specific to our needs. Well, not our needs. Those very narrow conditions promoted what we are. Without those conditions, dry, less rain, uh, but lots of open spaces with huge herds of animals, those conditions.
Better eyesight.
Better visibility, better able to plan. Where planning is suddenly advantageous and adaptive. You can see the herd. How are we going to get there? Who's going to go there? How are we going to surround it? Where are the traps going to be? All of that is enabled by being able to see 20 miles, 50 miles. So without that change in the Earth system, we probably never would have happened. Never would have happened. We probably already existed as bipedal organisms in the rainforest at this transition time, which took about 10 million years. So we were already probably toddling around on the forest floor, and then we just slotted into that new paradigm. We were already walking upright, probably at least most of the time, and then we could go out on the savannah and chase down these huge herds of meat, and gave rise to everything that came after. Well, what happens when these savannas and the grasslands and the areas that are adapted to cold and dry, which is what we are currently in, have been for about 5 million years, cold and dry. What happens when those become thick forests or even rainforests? What happens when the rain is falling all the time, or at least frequently enough that gigantic trees are growing? And again, you can't see. And there is no edge except at the ocean. Okay. Well, what happens to us? We're adapted to chasing herds, and then we translated that into using those open areas for dry land crops. Grains mostly, right? Corn, wheat, barley. That's us. We didn't evolve to sit on our butts in the forest eating bananas. That's not us. So what happens when the habitat that gave rise to us disappears under a green canopy? It's gone. What do we do? And you're not going to be, unless you're fighting the forest and you're fighting the rain somehow. I don't even know what that means. How do you fight the rain? Unless you're fighting the forest and fighting the rains, you don't have these cereal crops anymore. And you can't just send a tractor out to harvest billions of calories, to send to billions of people all over the planet.
Like what's even happening in Malaysia with the,
everybody becomes suddenly responsible for their food supply.
They're the rainforest, and it's no longer supplying, when it's flooded like that.
I'm not talking about flooding. I'm not talking about, oh no, the crop is underwater. That's not what I'm talking about at all. I'm talking about what happens when there's no open land to have a crop. Any crop of any, name something.
Well,
all you can do is what the primates that currently live in rainforests do. You climb a tree and you pull down fruit. Okay, that's not us. We don't even have climbing appendages anymore. Okay, we'll send up a robot. We have tractors, we have lifts and electric lifts and hydraulics and all this. Okay, fine. We'll make climbing into trees to getting the fruit a little bit easier.
You're just saying that we don't have land to grow food.
I'm saying that most people don't even know this, but the 8 billion people on this planet are supported by dry conditions, flat fields, thousands of acres of cereal crops that are grown, harvested in the most efficient manner possible by gigantic tractors that just go in straight lines for miles at a time, okay, harvesting these cereal crops. And when you look at the list is suddenly familiar, okay? Corn, wheat, barley, rice, peanuts, soybeans. These are the things that make up the fundamental foundation of our diets.
Right.
And even if you're eating meat,
They're eating meat. They're eating that. Yeah.
They're eating the corn. Okay, they're eating the sorghum. They're eating the soybeans that were harvested on very huge bare grasslands that used to be just grasses that the buffalo would eat, and we came through with our tractors and started growing the food that we want to eat. But it's still grains, still the same stuff. And you know, that's what's supporting people right now. Not picking a, you know, loquat off of a tree and eating it. That's not supporting 8 billion people. That is not happening. And you know, if we're going to lose this battle with climate change and global heating, then what may come in as a result may not be conducive to the way we currently do things. Now, people will say, well, technology, well, innovation, well, adaptation. Fine, yeah, go ahead and do that. But I'm telling you that without millions of acres, a flat, treeless expanse, scattered all over the planet, you're not going to have grains. And without grains, you're not going to have probably 90% of your diet.
And that's what happened with the derechos last year as well as this year now. We could lose our crops, you know, from Iowa.
Yeah. And so that's the next shoe to drop is, okay, so we're the Earth dynamic system is on an excursion. It's going to go to some new equilibrium. We don't even know what that's going to look like. We have some indications from the past what it might look like. But if it does end up looking like that, then we're not going to be supporting our current round of crops. Now, on the way to that new equilibrium, which could be 100, 200, 300 years from now, we are going to have periods when we can't do that anymore in parts of the world where that used to work reliably. Every year was the same. Maybe the crop yields were a little bit different, but every year you planted the same thing with the same expectation that the same behaviors and the same equipment, the same technology will be able to harvest the same food in pretty much the same rate for the same purposes. Okay, that era of sameness and stability is now in the rearview mirror. I don't think we're going back to that. We are on an excursion. This planet is taking us somewhere new. It may look familiar if you look back 20 million years, but again, no guarantee, but it should be like that. But that view 20 million years into the past, that view is not what we have now. Not even close. Nowhere near. Not anywhere close at all.
It's changing.
And that's setting aside the issues with 270 feet of sea level rise. It's also going to come. Now that sounds alarmist. 270 feet. You're crazy. No, not at all. That's how much water is locked up in ice. 270 feet. And 270 feet of sea level rise is nothing to joke about. My house right now in the South Bay is at an elevation of like 81 feet.
80.
So I will be under 200 feet of water right here. Right. My house will be under, my parcel will be under 200 feet of water right here. Oh. And this is the Bay Area. Okay.
And it's happening quicker than we realize. I mean, you know, with the, what is it called? That
it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter how quickly it happens. Level. It could be that this parcel is fine for another 100 years.
But that's it.
But 100 years is nothing. Right. In the bigger picture. 100 years is a blip. Terrible. That we don't 100 years is not enough time to move people out of this area. That's only 3 generations. You won't be able to move these people out of here in 100 years. And the flooding, the coastal flooding will start tomorrow.
And that's why we need to stop burning fossil fuels now, right?
Okay, that might not make any difference.
It's in the pipeline.
Yeah, yes, you should probably stop burning fossil fuels. You may buy yourself some time, lengthen your runway a little bit, but not a bad thing. Okay, not a bad thing. But that's pain now for future gain. And humans don't do that. Humans do not do. Our psychology does not allow us to manage pain now for future gain.
Well, even though
especially for future generations, we do not do that.
Forethought is supposed to be our claim to fame.
Okay, but forethought is not. No, we don't do that. Forethought is if I sharpen this stick,
I'll get more.
Then I can use this stick to poke that animal over there, and have a meal
right now.
immediately after that.
Right. So you're saying we're not
I
good
see
at
that
long-
animal, I see that herd of animals, I see a stick on the ground.
Yeah.
I'm going to sharpen that stick, kill one of those animals, and eat it. Okay,
So
that's forethought. That's
Yeah.
as far as we go. And by the way, there are very few animals that can pull that off.
So you're saying our forethought is very immediate gain.
Immediate gain. We're very good at that. We're better at that than any animal on earth.
But we're not good at long-term.
As far as we know.
Long-term.
But
plan.
forethought does not extend to anything beyond what we would now call immediate gain. We can do forethought for stock trading, we can do forethought for, I will invent this new product, sell it next quarter, and I'll be a millionaire by the end of the year. That's the level of forethought we can do. And we barely do that. We barely can accomplish.
But then they say the Native American thought 7 generations down the line. So.
I don't think they did. No, I don't think they did, because there's just no evidence that people do that. They claim they did that. Okay?
That was in their words.
They had words to that
action.
extent.
All right, fine.
But I don't know if they could do that.
Yeah.
It seems to be an organic limitation of the human brain, that we can't think far down the road. Now, that's especially true of complex systems. Complex systems like the Earth dynamic system do not lend themselves to the kind of thinking that we can do. You can't even fit the whole model of the Earth dynamic system in your head. You can't do it. Nobody can do it. We need computers to help us understand even what that thing looks like, what it sounds like, what it smells like. So with modern technology and number crunching, we can start to abstract some of the complexity out of the Earth dynamic system. But in terms of forethought, forget it. Forget it. You're not going to be, no one's going to be able to wrap their brain around where this thing is headed. For one thing, we don't know. But even if we could guess, which I propose we could, no one can think the 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 generations down the road on what we should do today to prepare people for that. No one can have that thought. Okay, that's not going to happen.
And the ice is melting. I mean, it's just the reality. Yeah. The ice is melting.
The ice is melting.
And a lot of it is coming now, and they're saying we're going to get 1 or 2 feet, pretty soon, very soon.
Yeah, and you don't need 270 feet of sea level rise to end your civilization. Most of our important cities and most of our important activities take place in coastal areas where 1 foot of sea level rise, 12 inches, 25 centimeters, would be the end. The end. Okay? Can't function, have to abandon these places, can't afford the changes, can't move these houses, just walk away. Just 1 foot of sea level rise, walk away. Time to walk away. And that's going to be amazingly disruptive. It's hard to even go down that road, how disruptive that's going to be. Yeah. And that's the first 1 foot, at least of all 3, okay? And these changes are happening immediately. And we're seeing it play out in our weather, even just this year.
Right, and so that's
winter of 2021, 2022.
Another signal of preparing for mass migration, because more, we're okay at 80 feet, so we have maybe 50 more years to be okay.
Yeah, 50 to 100.
But these other places are very vulnerable right now, like Florida, southern Florida. So there's another cohort of people that are.
And the irony is,
on the move.
Well, irony, tragedy. The tragedy is, people will leave southern Florida to move to other coastal areas, right? And then those will flood in 2 generations. And then they'll move to the Bay Area, and will flood in 3 generations. Yes. Okay. And every time this happens, it's hundreds of trillions of dollars in losses.
Right. And we're not preparing for any of this, even though it's here. And so this is where we're talking about it more, so people can get more data, because we're not getting the data from our current media, our current politicians, because everything is, business as usual.
So what can you do? Go solar, but don't go solar because you want to save the planet. Go solar because you want the electricity. Collect rainwater. Right. Don't collect rainwater because you want to conserve rainwater for your fellows. Collect rainwater because you want to have water.
And grow your crops. Yes. Grow your food.
And start a garden, not because you want to save the planet, but because you want food. Okay, right. It's selfish.
You want water,
it's selfish. Right. I want electricity. I want water. I want food. Okay, there you go. Those are my reasons. I'm not going to save the planet. Not going to save anybody. Not going to stop the migrations of climate refugees. I just want these things in my life. I want electricity. I want water, and I want food.
Right.
and I already have the shelter, so I guess I'm okay for that. And the rest of it, we'll see. We'll see how that works out. But that's why you do these things. You don't do these things. You don't put water collection on your roof and solar panels and cisterns in the ground. You don't spend all this money, do all this churn to save the planet, because that ship has sailed.
You're saving yourself.
You're saving yourself.
That's,
You want these things in your life
because it's very threatened. I mean, we're seeing
Yes.
that with, even the crops in the Midwest because of, food. I mean, that's not insecurity, but food.
Sure.
Well, it is food insecurity
Yeah.
because our crop lands are being destroyed by the weather that's happening
That's
in
right.
the Midwest.
Yeah.
And just like in the Philippines, when their mango trees and coconut trees go down, that's their food security. They're having trouble too.
Yeah, we just
So,
saw those videos last night. They were saying my mango tree was torn apart, and that's a big deal for those guys, because that tree grows all year. They have a tropical climate.
Right.
It produces mangoes all year.
Wow.
There's never a time it doesn't produce mangoes, and they eat from that tree.
And it was destroyed.
Many
of them. Yeah.
Okay, well, you go to town, buy mangoes. Really? That may not work, because
they don't have the money. And
they don't
they're
have the money
coming
for that.
from the Philippines. That's where our mangoes come from.
Yes.
And we love them, and we're not going to get them either.
No, we won't be getting them. And if I get them, they're $5 a piece or 10. And do you think the Filipino people can compete with that? No. All the mangoes in the Philippines are going to come to California. And what are they going to do? They used to have a mango tree in their backyard that they could control. Now they don't. So what are they going to do? And where are the grain crops going to come from? Where's the meat going to come from? Where's the fresh water going to come from? Where's the power going to come from? They don't have those things now. And, the last major typhoon that came ashore in the Philippines was 2013. And now they just had another one. And they probably just a few years ago, maybe even 2 years ago, rebuilt from the last time they had one of these.
And food security also deals with, in terms of our COVID, which is being our teacher about, getting us prepared for emergencies. It's better to stay out of the stores. So this is another reason to grow food locally and outside, to stay outside. And
staying out of the stores is one thing. And then there's also, if things keep going sideways, then the stores won't even be a place you can go to get all the things you need.
If they shut everything down, like you say,
or the shelves are empty, whatever.
And when a true shutdown, like we were talking about this morning, when we were looking at the shutdowns, would be, say everybody get your food and 2 weeks shut down. I mean, that's the kind of shutdowns we really need. So that's again preparing for these type of emergencies, to have some food.
Okay, but I'm not talking about emergencies. You
saying.
like to talk about emergencies and pandemics and earthquake preparedness. I'm not talking about something that's going to be a 2-week event and then you're fine. Phew, that was difficult, but now I'm back to getting my latte at Starbucks. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about we haven't had a coffee shipment to a Starbucks for 3 months.
Well, right.
Okay, these kind of disruptions are now totally in the pipeline.
Right. That's
We're
what I'm
seeing
saying.
them
We're
today.
seeing them today. Omicron, and what's happening. And it could come. I mean, Netherlands is shutting down. Kat's saying the real shutdown has to be absolute. It has to be.
Okay, they're not going to do it.
I know they're saying they're not, but
I don't know why you keep going back to talking about the pandemic.
They're not going to do it.
The pandemic isn't changing anything. Nothing has changed.
Well, we don't know that yet. You know what?
What do you mean we don't know that yet?
We don't know what's going to happen.
Go read the newspaper.
Netherlands
Tell me what the pandemic did.
Netherlands is
Nothing.
shutting down. Okay, all right, fine. But what Kat's saying, a true shutdown.
No, they're not shutting down, because then they say we're shutting down except for essential services. Boom.
Right,
you're not shut down.
Good.
So they're not doing it.
Right.
And you can say they're doing it, but they're not doing it, and they're telling you that.
But what they did in China, which really did work, is they told everybody, get your food, get ready to shut down. And it was 2 weeks shutdown. There was nobody out, and that's
and if you were caught on the streets, you were arrested. Yeah. That's a shutdown.
So that's
what it looks like. Is that ever going to happen in America? No.
But is it good for
going to happen in the Netherlands?
That way?
No.
Should we be thinking that way?
Okay,
I don't think
people can think that way, and you can think that way. But when these leaders think about how disruptive that's going to be to their economy, they don't do it.
But anyway, we're talking about survival, and so we have to start getting into survival mode. And
they're talking about economics.
I know, and that's
they're not talking about survival.
I know they're wrong.
And they don't care if a bunch of people die from the pandemic, and they don't care if the hospitals are overwhelmed. They just don't care. Those people are dead. They're no longer a problem. And the people who are alive are grateful that they got to live their lives. And when the election season rolls around, people will vote for the leaders who allowed life to go back to normal.
Okay, now I'm going to go out.
And the dead people don't vote.
Yeah, I'm going out to do my putting my my pump in my water collection barrels, and watering my garden before the rains come again.
Right.
And what are you going to do?
I have
Up
lots
on
of
the
things
roof.
to do.
On your, yeah, building our apartments, housing, making more housing.
Housing.
Thank you.
Right.
That's great. Affordable housing, really.
Having it at all.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
Having it at all.
I was just looking at
The price becomes no object at some point.
Right. That's
Do you have it? Can I get it? Fine. I'm in.
Right. Right.
That's the situation we're at right now.
Right. And it's got to be, yeah. Like I was just reading that these tiny homes that they built like for temporary housing, and now people are getting notices saying you got to leave. So it didn't really work, the system. It was like temporary for 6 weeks or something, give them housing. And then they're supposed to find them permanent housing, but they can't find permanent housing.
It was just optics.
They can't find permanent housing.
It was optics. It was housing theater. It was never meant to be permanent. Just optics. How does it look? Does it look good? Do we look good? Do we look like we did something?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, we're done.
Yeah.
That's it. Did we avoid the crisis? Yes, we're done. Can I brag next election season that I solved the homeless crisis? Yes, I can. Done. We're done. My bragging is in the bag. I'm done. We don't have to do this anymore.
And
that's how everything is going to be. All about optics. I'm done. I got things to do.
We love you. Oh, good. And you'll share that